It's weird they call it playing. As if calluses and late rehearsals and hoarse mornings don't exist. They make it sound like butterflies just tickle, or spotlights can't really warm you up. Some people get that it's the wrong word. My parents know playing won't support me, and they'll probably lose sleep until they trust that my professors agree. I'm well aware that playing will not open the doors I need opened. It won't break down the walls I need broken, and it won't call me up on any of the million stages that are waiting. Playing won't make me smile. It won't make them cry. It won't help me project what's in my heart or begin to tell you who I am. So here I am, discovering, leading, writing, performing, questioning, and transcending. I'm frustrated, I'm euphoric, I'm inspired and exhausted and fulfilled in the only way I've ever known I could be. I'm a student of music, and I am definitely not playing.
Dear Lenny, it is 4 o'clock in the morning after this long, long day. Everyone has gone to bed, but I want to stay up by myself to think about so many things and about today.
I am, of course, merely a musician and have no business speaking in a political situation.
In awful times, I think the only thing that comforts you is the goodness in people. I want to write you that tonight, or this morning, whatever it is, because when I get home, I will be so tired.
But America is now in so much more of a political situation that every one of us has been turned into a political person. Hello, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Mike Harley, and this is the Southern Exposure New Music Series at the University of South Carolina. This is our third of 4 yearly concerts. If you're a regular Southern Exposure listener, patron, thank you so much for coming. If you're new, welcome. I want to give you a warm Southern welcome to the series. Tonight, we are featuring a group that is near and dear to my heart. This is Alarm Will Sound, an ensemble that I happen to be a member of. And in this, our very first foray for the series, for Southern Exposure in the online medium, I wanted to feature a group that's been taking creative risks and doing some really interesting things during the pandemic. And so this is essentially a survey of one of Alarm Will Sound's creative projects called Video Chat Variations. Joining me this evening to introduce the concert and the first piece is Alarm Will Sound's executive director, Gavin Chuck. Gavin, welcome to Southern Exposure.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having us. It's great to be here again.
Of course. Yes, again, and our Alarm Will Sound did play on the series about 15 years ago.
It was a great experience. We remember so well how energized the audience was. For years and years afterwards, we just think of that day as being so special. And really, it's the work that John Fitz Rogers put into creating that series that really has created an audience for new music in Columbia, South Carolina. So I'm really glad that we had that experience and that we can come back here virtually tonight.
It's a privilege for me to be a part of the series that John started, and some things are coming full circle this evening because at the close of tonight's program, we will hear the big world premiere of John's new piece, Respiration, for Alarm Will Sound. So very excited to hear this new piece for the first time. Gavin, I wondered if you could talk about this whole process that has been the video chat variations and what Alarm Will Sound has been doing to create new music during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think when we all went into lockdown in March of 2020, the initial response, very understandable, of performing artists was to put a lot of archival work, maybe start some live streams from your apartment out into the world. Alarm Will Sound, first of all, we're a large ensemble. We're 17 musicians. And so we knew that we had to take a different approach to putting music out online. And I think we decided that we would start Video Chat Variations as a series that used the medium in interesting ways to make music. And the first thing to note about it is that we built a technical platform that allowed us to make music together in real time. So we weren't recording separately and then putting it together like you would a recording. We were really listening to each other play at the same time and seeing each other over Zoom. And that was, I think, one condition that we wanted to create for ourselves as musicians. I think a second condition that we wanted to create was to challenge composers to use video chat not merely as a medium, but to explore the artistic possibilities of Zoom, of internet technologies, to create works that are specifically made using that technology. And so we are creating a series of works, and we'll hear many of them tonight. The premiere of John Fitz Rogers' pieces among them. But you'll see the various ways in which composers take advantage of the quirks and of the inherent beauty of the technology that produces Zoom, that produces all the ways that we can be together in a time when we physically have to be distant.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the first of this evening's pieces. This is composer Meredith Monk's Anthem. How does Anthem particularly relate to the medium?
So it's very interesting that Meredith Monk was the first person we worked with, because she is not, at least for me, somebody that I think of as working with, current technologies on the forefront of, the kinds of things that we ended up doing. But I think really why it worked so well was that the idea, the creative idea behind it, was so perfectly suited to the medium. What that was, she actually was thinking about, she had a creative idea before all of this pandemic circumstance and video chat technology came up. She had an idea that was inspired by the Buddhist notion of Indra's net, in which people are connected to each other across space and time. And when you think about Zoom, that's essentially what we are doing. We're connecting with each other remotely, and we are in our own spaces. We're sort of delayed time. And so the idea behind Anthem turned out to be just really well suited to video chat medium. And so I'm really glad that Alan Pierson, our artistic director, had the insight to ask Meredith to write this piece for us, because it really turned out to be the perfect way to kick this series off.
You know, I relate to what you're saying as a player. I remember this sort of lonely weirdness of sitting there playing into my computer and trying across the miles to connect with the other players during the recording of The Monk.
Yeah, I think it's just an interesting way that we are essentially living with each other now in this remote way. In some ways, it's wonderful that we can connect, but it's complex because, you know, it's like I can almost see you. So the closeness, I'm glad to be talking to you, and we're glad to be playing with each other. But there's also this kind of tension built into that interaction, because we're almost together, but we're actually not. And really, you know, one of the things that artists can do is explore and experiment with all those kinds of tensions. That's artistic material, and that's what I think you'll find in any number of the pieces tonight.
And I think throughout this evening's program, you'll see different ways of kind of exploiting that tension and exploring those areas, that distance between us that we're all trying to bridge right now.
Yeah, and I think we'll also have a chance to talk about that at the end of the concert. So we'll stick around afterwards, and there'll be a question and answer period. And I think we can talk some more about this. But before we begin, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the Ernst von Siemens Foundation, who has supported all the work in the video chat variations, and also to recognize the Mizzou International Composers Festival, which is the venue where we premiered Anthem in July of 2020.
Great, thank you. And yeah, listeners should also know that you are welcome to write any questions that occur along the way in the chat of the platform that you're listening on, and we'll be collecting those during the concert and trying to answer as many of them as we can in the live discussion afterwards with composer John Fitz Rogers, Gavin, conductor and artistic director of Alarm Will Sound, Alan Pierson, and Alarm Will Sound's flutist, Erin Lesser. So, thanks again for coming, and let's start off this evening's concert by listening to Meredith Monk's Anthem, performed by Alarm Will Sound and Meredith Monk and Vocal Ensemble.
Do a little dance here to the rock, though, you know, so.
Kind of wonderful. I need a screenshot of that. Oh, I guess I can't get one. Okay.
Okay, if you're ready, give me a thumbs up.
Welcome back. You've been listening to Alarm Will Sound and Meredith Monk and Vocal Ensemble perform Monk's Anthem, recorded live and in real time this past summer as the first of Alarm Will Sound's video chat variations. I think you can hear the impact of the medium itself on that work and how the work embraced, in fact, the delays and latency that occur when players are performing, perhaps in some instances, thousands of miles from each other. It becomes this world of blurred edges, of harmonies that intermingle, of melodic lines that float around each other and perhaps move at slightly different paces, never quite connect in a way that's predictable. And that unpredictability is a real part of the sort of soundscape of that piece. This next work is entirely unpredictable, and in fact, it's entirely different each time because it's a group improvisation. Tyshawn Sorey is a composer, conductor, percussionist, brilliant all-around musician, and of late he has been taking a technique called conduction, of essentially leading players as a conductor in large group improvisations that was first developed in the jazz world, and adapting that, making it his own, in this case adapting it for the online medium. And so in this improvisatory performance, you'll see Tyshawn cueing different players with cue cards with symbols written on them that mean very specific things to the players. He can cue specific players even that way, or cue groups of players by having them view specific cards on specific monitors. And so this, I think the continuity that this piece has and the sense of development and yet comprehensible shape that the improvisation takes is a real testament to Tyshawn's extraordinary musicianship and ability to sort of mold sounds as they happen and create this architecture in real time. We're not going to be able to listen to the entire piece tonight. We're going to hear two approximately 4-minute sections out of a much longer work that you are certainly welcome to check out on YouTube. So tonight, let's listen to a couple excerpts from Autoschediasms by Tyshawn Sorey. This is the Southern Exposure New Music Series at the University of South Carolina. I'm your host, Mike Harley, and you've been listening to Alarm Will Sound, led by Tyshawn Sorey. Next, we are going to take a behind the scenes look at a video chat variation that is a work in process. You'll be the very first to get to see snippets of this really visually and orally spectacular new piece for 4 performers. The performers from the group are trumpet player Tim Leopold, clarinetist Beth Stimpert, percussionist Matt Smallcombe, and myself. But as you'll see, we are not actually playing our instruments. In fact, we are playing remote controls, which connect with Wii controllers and essentially, ultimately, are performing on the composer's laptop and creating this world of electronic sounds. So to explain how all this works, and to have a look again at some portions of the piece in development, we're going to listen in on a discussion between Gavin Chuck and the composer Rohan Chander, who is a composer, pianist, and tabla player based in New York City. I should mention that this piece is supported by the Matt Marks Impact Fund. The Matt Marks Impact Fund seeks to support projects that are particularly unconventional or groundbreaking, or inventive works by composers who are underrepresented in the field. So let's listen to Gavin and Rohan discuss Prayers Are Made of Silicon.
We're joined by Rohan Chander. And Rohan, you're writing a piece for us called My Prayers Are Made of Silicon. And on tonight's program, we want to give the audience just a preview of that before we release it later this year. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
This video chat variation is one part of a larger work, and it's embedded in a larger narrative. Can you tell us about that narrative and about that larger work?
My Prayers Are Made of Silicon exists in this sort of projected future where people have essentially discovered or created a technology to confirm an existence of God. And by doing so, they sort of go on this kind of violent rampage where they're able to kind of track God and essentially destroy this entity. And the fallout is that they start to sacralize this secular technology that essentially enabled them their power. This piece kind of retells a little bit of that story, or kind of abstracts that narrative into the gestures, into the story of the work, into the aesthetic conversations that happen, switch from, cyberpunk kind of, which is a very anti-capitalist sort of musical or cultural material, to like Palestrina, which is a very, by nature is very religious. And certainly the Palestrina excerpt that is used in this piece is in praise of God.
So on the one hand, it's a kind of piece that's, you said it's a fantasy, but we're doing that in actually this new reality. How do you feel about the piece in terms of its fantasy, but also the making of it and the way we're putting it together in this current reality?
Sure, yeah. I'm fascinated by the idea of art making now, wherein you key into these things that actually are separative forces as opposed to deny them. It's like I would feel weird trying to make a work that stimulated the experience of being together when we're just like, we're not together. We're not together. We can't make stuff together. I don't even know really if, I mean, it's not to sound like a stoner, but like, I don't know if anyone is even real, like when we're on video chat, because like, it's just like a 2D thing. They're just bytes.
We're living in a simulation.
Yeah, exactly. Like we're all just bytes floating in space.
So, in the before times, we would have been in the same room together, rehearsing and working on it together. And there, the relationships and maybe even some of the practices that we would be engaged in would be the traditional ones, and we wouldn't actually have to think about them. Because when you're in the room together playing your traditional instruments, you're actually relying on a whole bunch of things that you already know. And maybe it's not so much that you check out, it's that your attention is in a different place. But I think the way that you've made this piece is calling for even more focus even more attention.
Yeah, I really hope that, if anything, that this work doesn't try to run away from the internet, because the internet it's a beautiful, weird, messy tapestry, and I don't want to run away from it. I've never tried to run away from that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the technology and how people are making music.
They're making sound through motion control. They're moving. As they move, they create sounds. The sounds change tremendously throughout the piece, but their gestures are actually not, the gestures themselves are largely obfuscated, like in the context of the work. You don't really know the extent to which the gestures and the literalness to which the gestures are creating sound. So much of the music I grew up on, it's producers in their bedroom who you don't really know how they're making the sound at all. And there's kind of like an opportunity to impose, like it gives us a freedom to impose our own kind of subjective understanding upon what those sounds are and what they mean and how they're made. And so when I was thinking about the gestural language for this piece, I wasn't really trying to make the sound, music, reality, or connection super obvious or super literal, because I found that there's an opportunity here to keep the freedom of fantasy embedded into the sound making itself, and instead treat the gesture as a storytelling mechanism, as a way to kind of illustrate a mythos of this society in the way that, a lot of dance forms do. I tried to approach the gesture and the sound making and the motion control as a mechanism for storytelling, as opposed to like a purely sound to body mechanism.
We're used to the notion that doing this with a violin makes a sound, doing this with a flute makes a sound. And that's, as you said, it's that in your piece, that's obfuscated. It's also in another important way obfuscated that I think is maybe so obvious, but it's worth mentioning. The sounds aren't being made by the musicians right then and there, right? Can you talk a little bit about how the actual sounds come about?
There's a Wii remote camera, the infrared camera from the Wii remote, and then there's an old TV, like these Roku TV remotes that are kind of gutted and modded slightly. And then there's a laptop.
They're playing your laptop through the internet.
Yeah, exactly. My laptop is like essentially their instrument, which is weird to think, being that I'm not there. In a way, it's so, because of the limitations of it, it embeds us into performing this piece in very specific spaces. We have to kind of be at home in our safe spaces, in our little basement. Like, I'm in my parents' basement. I can only I realize this piece in my parents' basement. They have to be like in their bedroom in their apartment. Like, something about that too, I think, is also kind of hopefully, kind of magical and exciting, especially since like that's the only place we're allowed to be now.
Yeah, to me, what's interesting about that is that it's not only using the technical platforms that we have, it's also using the condition of what we're in right now, and it's using that as the artistic material. If you're making this piece in a way that actually requires us to be remote in front of a screen. Screens are very important as well to the way that you're communicating this. So tell us a little bit about what the score looks like, because I think that has also is specific to video chat.
Yeah, the score essentially is a video of me performing their part, and there's also these colors that are really bright colors that are superimposed on top of it. So when they're performing in a dark room, everybody has to perform this piece in like kind of like a nearly completely pitch black room, in front of their laptops at like maximum brightness. Their part is being streamed to them in real time. They're mimicking it. And as the piece is going, the colors on their parts are also changing. So at certain moments, one person's laptop is now suddenly really blue. And so you can see the blue, suddenly they're lit blue, the environment around them is kind of blue, but everyone else is still black. And sometimes that kind of comes in and out, and sometimes it's shared where they're all red.
I think I've never seen a score like that. And really, look, a traditional score is also a piece of technology, represents printing technology, and it represents a way of encoding information. So notes on a page is technology, and watching you perform a gesture on a video screen, these are just different kinds of technologies. But what's interesting is that you're using this technology of video over the internet to make new music. And I think that's really great.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Welcome back. This is the Southern Exposure New Music Series, and I hope you enjoyed that sneak preview of Rohan Chander's Prayers Are Made of Silicon. The last piece on tonight's program is a world premiere, as mentioned earlier, by John Fitz Rogers, the founder of the Southern Exposure New Music Series back in 2001. And I have with me to help introduce John's piece, Respiration, written for Alarm Will Sound, the conductor and artistic director of the ensemble, and my good friend, Alan Pierson. Alan, welcome to Southern Exposure.
Thanks. Hey, Mike. Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And listeners, you should know that Alan recently came down with Bell's palsy. So that is why he has a bit of a pirate look about him this evening.
I think it's a good look for me.
It's a great look. It's a very good look. So, Alan, really appreciate you coming on here and soldiering through. I wanted to talk about your role and on John's piece and John's piece in general. Listeners probably noticed that Alan played keyboard on the first piece tonight, Monk, and he was really overseeing the artistic process for both the Sorey and the Chander. And back in John's piece, he's back in his typical domain as conductor. And Alan, talk about the challenges, the unusual challenges, I think, that this piece posed for you as a conductor and just for the ensemble.
Yeah, it's been a really remarkable experience working on this piece with John, and unlike any other conducting experience that I've ever had. We asked everybody doing these video chat variations works to embrace the video medium and create something that grappled with and made something artistic out of the constraints that we're all facing and trying to make art remotely. And John so fully embraced that challenge. And so there are all these things that he did in creating the piece to make it something that would work in this, bizarre alienated remote medium that we're working in. So, for most of the piece, there's not a pulse that we're all trying to feel together. And when there is a pulse, it's usually just one person playing that. And these are all ways that John has adapted to the video chat medium, which has all these limitations of latency, which make it it would be hard to play like a Steve Reich piece over this medium. And I know that for John, who writes a lot of rhythmic music, that forced a real kind of exploration of like new ways of approaching time. But then in doing that, John created this piece that requires this really detailed and intense kind of listening and communication. And that was a huge and really interesting challenge in the medium. So you have lots of players who are doing these very free things. There's a lot of improvisation and independence, but then you have all these players moving in different ways at the same time, who then have to come out of this very free stuff and have these moments of very specific coordination where we have to listen to each other and react to each other in really specific ways. And we're doing this all over Zoom and over oh my God, Jamulus, which is what we use for audio. And which has latency. We're also like hearing each other over headphones, and we're all having to get the mix just exactly right so we hear everything that we need. And I have to listen to everyone and give these cues. And John planned all this out very carefully, and it all works. But like the video is more latent than the audio, so that means that I have to always be like listening and anticipating where an improviser is going to go, and then give a cue that hopefully gets everyone to like land there, knowing that like I'm hearing the audio late, and that the people who are watching me for the cue are going to see my video late. It's just a really interesting challenge that is unlike anything I've ever done.
Yeah.
And then, also John imagined me giving all of these different kinds of indications, somewhat inspired by what Tyshawn did in the video chat variations he created for us, where I'm indicating different kinds of activity happening throughout the piece. And that too is like a really interesting challenge because, we're all so used to being able to just look at each other. And me as a conductor, like so much of my language is about looking at someone and making eye contact. Right. And, you can't do that in this medium. And also like right now, because of my Bell's palsy situation, like my face is not as expressive as it usually is. And so it's in so many ways, it is like working through limitation.
Yeah.
And I think we all felt the really interesting struggle of that and the grappling with that.
Yeah.
And it was very much a communal experience of the whole band, learning how to listen to each other and respond to each other and connect with each other, through this new medium that we're learning how to work with.
Yeah. And as a player, I think I found those moments of connection incredibly gratifying when you have a cue, an oral cue to latch onto, and then you feel like you know where it's going, and of course hoping that you're placing your notes where they're actually supposed to sound.
Right.
And,
right.
Not watching too closely, but watching closely enough. Surprising how much we utilize as players the visual element of everything, in performance. But yeah, it was. I just found it such a kind of a gratifying and all-encompassing experience recording John's piece.
And that's when it all comes together and we all learn to hear each other and feel each other and follow each other. What's so gratifying about the piece is that it is based on this idea of respiration. Yeah. And so when it all really works, it does feel like we're this like spread about the country organism somehow breathing together across the internet. And that was a very, very cool, unique experience.
Absolutely. Something else that I found really gratifying and fantastic was that actually the online medium afforded the chance for 5 USC string players to join Alarm Will Sound, 5 students from USC. And again, that's an opportunity I hope that was special for the players. It certainly was great to have them on board, playing with us in some of the kind of climactic sections of the piece in particular. And it wouldn't probably have been something that we would have tried to do had we had Alarm Will Sound here in person. But that became a really unique opportunity for students here to collaborate with Alarm Will Sound. So I found that really special as well. And I do want to give a shout out to Kayi, Emilio, Alberto, Calvin, and Jonathan, the string players who joined us. So look, thank you again for coming this evening, for listening to this program. And we're now going to play the final work, Respiration, by John Fitz Rogers. We will be back in a live conversation with the composer and to answer your questions following the premiere of Respiration. Wow. That was the world premiere of Respiration by John Fitz Rogers. And this is Mike Harley. I'm hosting the Southern New Music Series live from my office in Columbia, South Carolina. Thank you all so much for watching, wherever you might be, and for joining us in this post-concert discussion. I'm joined now by the composer of Respiration, John Fitz Rogers, from his home in Columbia. Alarmo Sound's Alan Pierson, artistic director from New York. Hey. Gavin Chuck, managing executive director of Alarmo Sound from Chicago. And Erin Lesser, our flutist from Appleton, Wisconsin. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to those of you listening. And some of you entered some questions in the chat during the concert, which we will try to get to. And you're welcome to continue to enter those, and we will get to them. So John, first of all, I wanted to start off with congratulations. I think it's such a gorgeous, gorgeous, powerful piece. And congratulations on the work.
Thank you. And I can't express my thanks to everyone at Alarmo Sound for helping make this project possible, and also for the USC School of Music and for Southern Exposure and for the wonderful students who performed tonight. This really was, I felt, a deeply collaborative project, and so I'm really grateful to all of you for helping make this happen.
Well, I know, speaking on behalf of Alarmo Sound, we're so grateful that you wrote this beautiful piece for us to play. I thought we could start by talking with you a little bit about the compositional process, because I know we've discussed that this was not an easy piece for you to write, especially at the outset. It imposed so many challenges that you don't normally have to deal with as a composer. Among other things, players that really can't hear each other or see each other that well in real time, but are still trying to play together. Can you talk a little bit about the process and what you found challenging about and how you worked to overcome those things?
Sure. The process really began by asking a lot of questions. I know you and I, Mike, had numerous conversations and many long text message exchanges. And Alan and Gavin, I spoke both with you several times to just try to figure out how this can work. I've never written a piece where players can't play together. There's always these kind of hearing issues. And so it was really it started with questions. And then I would say probably for 6 or 7 weeks, a lot of false starts. I have many discarded sketches and ideas that I thought, oh, well, this will work. And then I text you, Mike, and you're like, well, I can't really hear that, or I can hear this. And I had to kind of figure out my way as I went along. So really the first 2 months of writing this piece were not writing. Some of those ideas found their way into the final piece, but it took me a while to get my bearings. And once I got my bearings, I felt like, okay, I think I know how this is going to work. I think I can figure out how to do this, but it just took a long process of discarding ideas, which is normal, I think, in any creative endeavor. You get rid of things as much as you keep things. But in this piece in particular, just because of the rhythmic challenges and the coordination, that proved especially interesting, I guess.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about how you solved some of those challenges. How did the score account for the issue? You write very rhythmic music. You're well known for writing really rhythmically fast and exciting and very precise music, which couldn't really do in some ways here. What was the solution?
Well, you better than most people, Mike, know that I'm a fan of rhythm and rhythmic precision. I like pulse a lot. And so I couldn't do that. And I was just talking to my students today about the idea that creativity always has to happen within limits. You always have to decide what you're not going to do as much as you decide what you are going to do. And so I just had to kind of relinquish the idea of pulse, although you do hear pulse in this piece, but it's only one instrument, right? It's an instrument that can give harmony, or it's the drums later on. So I think in this process, this was a real revelatory process for me. I think in a way that no other composition I've written has been revelatory, in the sense that I learned something about myself. And it's actually a question that I have for all of you too, about what you might have learned about yourself as musicians. So what I learned is it's not really pulse and rhythmic precision and meter that I'm so interested in. It's ensemble and community. It's the way, how do we interact together as musicians? Pulse is the thing that can bring us together. But as I discovered in writing this piece, it's only one thing that can bring us together. And so I decided that this piece really, and this was in conversation with you, Gavin, too, that I really wanted this piece to be about community, because some of my pieces are about not listening to each other, but that is in a way, in the way we relate to each other. We don't listen to each other, we do something else. But this piece really taught me that I value the idea of musical community probably more than anything else. And so it was a real gift for me to kind of discover that.
That's really lovely, John. That really resonates with me. And it reminds me of one piece that I kind of feel in the, like, you know, in the, I don't know, the ancestors of Respiration, which we didn't talk about, which is Music for 18 Musicians by Steve Reich, which is another piece that is very deeply about community, but where the relationship between the parts is about listening and about creating a sense of community, but it's not scored out in a conventional way where, like, you know, there's a progression and everyone has to line up in a sort of ordinary way. It's also a piece that's also very much about breath. So I see it in the, I don't know, in the, somewhere in the like ancestry of Respiration.
For sure. I mean, that piece is a deeply important piece to me and has been for a long time. And it's kind of hard not to have that be a part of this world, but certainly that piece is based on pulse, but
Yeah,
there's always a
right.
pulse that ties everyone together.
Right.
This piece doesn't sound like that, but the ethos, I think you're absolutely right, Alan, the ethos of that sense of community and how we listen to each other, how we can listen to each other over the internet and still feel like a community. That is, I think Music for 18 Musicians is really kind of the progenitor of that, for sure.
Let me look at some questions from the chat and from some of our listeners, and I can maybe direct these to some of you specifically. Here's a question for Erin Lesser, our flutist, who you saw playing the bass flute, for example, at the very beginning of John's piece. Very cool. We don't always get to see that instrument broken out at all. So this is a question about, for you as a performer, how has the experience of recording remotely changed since Alarmo Sound began these video chat variations on a piece like Monk until now?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I can't believe that first piece that we watched tonight was 6 months ago. It kind of simultaneously feels like years ago. And then you realize that this is all still kind of fresh and new in so many ways. So time has become a very interesting thing, I think. Yeah. I was kind of thinking as I was watching all these pieces that in that initial Monk experience, I really was relying just on oral cues and feeling so insecure and questioning what I was hearing and feeling pretty isolated, despite having a great experience with the piece and all of that. It was just a very surreal kind of experience at the beginning. And then Tyshawn's kind of turned everything on its head. It was so visual, like you had to be like fixated on the screen, watching for his cues, never knowing when it was going to happen, not knowing what the delay might be. And John, I feel like tonight with your piece, what was really, really satisfying is that you brought together the visual and the oral, I thought. So we were really able to watch Alan and Alan prepared us for cues. You could see like like kind of get ready, something's coming. And then we're able to kind of tap into different instruments and hear those sort of musical personalities in our headphones. And it was just such a great experience to sort of bring those elements back together, because I feel like I've been missing that.
Yeah. I think I felt maybe it's just getting used to the medium, but more of a sense of community, maybe playing John's piece and recording John's piece than I did in the others. It was if the others were sort of a slow preparation for this. And I think part of it's getting used to the weirdness of the medium, but part of that is the way, Alan, you mentioned in remarks before the piece of how we kind of feel like we're breathing together. And this organism is pulsing and changing chords together, and a very fulfilling kind of feeling.
Yeah, I still, I was having so many feelings watching this, and one was like a sort of disbelief that we weren't doing this a year ago. This whole way of making music together, working in real time over the internet has has grown more and more natural. I won't say it's 100% natural yet. There are still ways in which, I feel ourselves like sometimes grappling with the medium and its challenges. But like, I can't imagine having done a piece that demanded the kind of connection and breathing together and listening to each other, which is so intricate. That John's piece demanded. I can't imagine having done that, in July. Like, we needed those early experiences to prepare ourselves for this.
Right, and I barely knew what an Ethernet cable was in July, for example. So we fall. And that maybe segues a little. And listeners have some questions about some of the specifics of how this happened and what made it unusual. Gavin, there's a question about whether you can speak to some of the stuff that went on behind the scenes, like, in other words, production decisions, the technological considerations, and maybe disasters that did or did not occur. One listener is asking, were balances good, or did we adjust these? Can you speak to some of maybe a little bit about how the sausage was made behind the scenes as well?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. I think that there are two aspects about this. There's one which is just a purely technical problem, but the technical problems and the technical solutions and the entire technological platform really is in service of what we value as artists, which is making beautiful things. So we had, in the initial concept building of this, we just recognized that Zoom and teleconferencing was just a condition of our lives. And if we're artists making music now, that should reflect that. So let's just use this technology. And we quickly discovered that it was not going to be Zoom alone, but it was because Zoom is built for speech. And for example, I think, as we all know from any Zoom call that involves 5 or more people, like crosstalk, basically Zoom is deciding who is the main speaker at any point. So we quickly basically divided the world up into audio technology and video technology. And essentially we use Zoom to visually communicate with one another and also to capture the performances. And then we tried a number of different platforms. One is Jamulus. We've used Clean Feed, things that are built for higher audio quality, but more importantly, that people can hear each other and that they can set balances either on their own, or that an engineer in the background can sort of set balances so people are hearing what they can hear. Lots of problems along the way, many of them being simply the fact that 20 years of a conservatory music training does not tell you what a router is. And we had to essentially spend, I think in the first instance before the Monk, maybe we spent 90 minutes with each person. So 90 minutes times 25 people, like saying, okay, plug this cable into that, do this, turn that. So the logistical leap was a significant one just in terms of knowledge. But I think it's one that's worth taking for two reasons. One is that it got us to this point to make music. But I think there's something that's really fascinating about the role of technology in actual sound and music making. And it reminded me of an experience I had when I heard for the first time at Eastman, I heard the Hammerklavier Sonata played on an actual Hammerklavier. I'd heard that piece many times played on a modern piano, and it's beautiful and whatever, and it's dramatic and so on. But when I heard it on a Hammerklavier, an actual instrument, that instrument was at its breaking point. And it made it so much more exciting. And I heard across the centuries, I heard Beethoven figuring out technology. And I think that's something that's really interesting in what we've chosen to do here, to make the technology actually part of the artistic material, is that there's something about grappling with it that leaves its mark on the art itself, and that expresses something about its time. And, you know, great pieces of art are timeless, but great pieces of art also hold on to the time and express the time that they're in. And so, like, I also edited the video and have been editing the video for these series. And, you know, we could have brought in, I suppose in principle, 4K Ultra HD cameras. But no, we actually use the cameras, people's phone and webcams, and the video quality is not what you would see in a highly produced video, but I think it bears that mark of like struggling with the technology, like the Hammerklavier struggled with the sound of that instrument. And there's something, I think, there's something beautiful in that struggle. And I want the work we put out to bear that mark.
Yeah.
I want to take a second just to connect two things that have been said so far. One is, you know, Gavin, that great analogy you made of the Hammerklavier Sonata and hearing Beethoven struggle with the technology, and the thing that John said at the beginning about, you know, struggling with how to write this piece in these limitations, and about how creative limitations can be. And I think you really hear that in the piece. And it's something that, you know, I've loved all the video chat projects that we've done so far, but something that I think really sets John's apart is that he used these limitations to push him into a new way of making music. Like, I feel like, you know, most of the work in video chat variations we've done so far, you can feel people like taking a thing they were already doing and like adapting it to the medium. Whereas John, I really feel like you came up with a whole new way of thinking about time and music and independence and community, and challenge yourself to do something that was really new for you. And I think you feel that in the piece you gave us.
Yeah. Some questions from some listeners. So one listener from the Columbia area is asking about rhythm in John's piece, and whether or not the rhythmic durations were improvised or were they actually notated. John, maybe.
Sure. So there is one section that's written with time signatures, but it's written in such a way that if people are late or early, it's going to sound good. So yeah. I wrote it so that it could be blurry. But most of the piece, what you think of when you look at sheet music and you see a measure or a bar of music, that usually indicates a certain number of pulses. For me, in this piece, a measure is just a unit of time. And there's a kind of range that I give in the score. It could be, you know, 8 to 12 seconds here. And this is really based on Alan and what he feels, you know, kind of feeling in the moment, okay, we feel like we need to move, or we feel like we need to hold back a little bit. So that flexibility allows, I think, for a kind of elasticity and a little bit of kind of performing in the moment. So the notes, the way I wrote the piece, the harmony is totally controlled. Everything, the pacing, if you heard another performance of the piece, it would still sound like this piece. But players are given notes, and there's a lot of verbal instructions. So as I mentioned to Alan, learning this piece, I think for the players, the way I thought of it, I'll be curious, Mike and Erin, your thoughts on this. I thought it's more like learning lines of a play. There's not a lot to practice in a traditional way. You don't see, okay, here's 20 measures of difficult music and I've got to woodshed this and get this down. it's kind of memorizing these instructions that I give, these sort of detailed instructions. Here are the notes. Here's are some things I want you to do. Here's who I want you to listen to. And that has to be kind of spontaneous. It can't be read in the moment. And so it's almost like memorizing lines of a play in a way.
Yeah, it struck me, and you warned me about this beforehand, John, that if I was reading those verbal cues and trying to play my part at the same time, it just wouldn't work. I wasn't able to truly react to what I was hearing and fit in with that in the way that I sort of, and Erin too, I'd love to hear if you practice, for example, John's piece. I didn't practice it at all in a conventional way, but I had to think about it a lot and know when I'm in these passages here, this is the ethos, this is how active I need to be. This is what's going to be going on around me and what I'm trying to listen for. And I really had to kind of study the piece rather than somehow work out anything technically. Did you find that?
Yeah, I had a very similar experience where I was writing like one descriptive word over a bar or something, like giving myself more of an emotional cue to latch on to. But I really love this kind of writing. I think it's perfect for a piece about breath, because you really get caught up in what you're hearing in your ears and watching Alan try to get us a little more anxious or create a current of activity, or then like trying to find that space and the ability to manipulate what you're playing in real time really creates, like you said, elasticity in a more authentic way than how we usually have to study and plan our breaths as wind players, especially. So it's really satisfying when it starts to go well. Like Mike said, there's a bit of a learning curve, trying to remember what's coming next.
But it's so freeing, I think, as a player. And as classical musicians, we certainly, and more, we're called upon to improvise. One notices this, I think, over the last 5 to 10 years. But there's still something so freeing about not being tied specifically to the page, but really making your own call by listening about where you're going to put stuff and how you're going to interpret a particular gesture and which notes of those notes that you're given are you going to play and how are you going to play them. Very freeing.
I should just also add that I played jazz in high school, a little bit in college, and I don't consider myself a jazz musician at all, but certainly that was very much on my mind. And thinking about jazz, and also thinking a little bit about the Duke Ellington Orchestra and writing for the strengths of the individual players in Alarm Will Sound. What you guys don't know is I went and listened to all of you. I really wanted to make this kind of a personal piece and listen to what you could do and what works for you. And Mike, of course, I know you're playing deeply, but I really wanted to personalize it in that way. And of course, that really comes out of a jazz ethos as well. So that was an important inspiration for me too.
Yeah.
That's really nice, John.
Yeah. John, I just got to throw this question out here for you. This is a question from a member of the ensemble, actually. How will John celebrate his awesomeness? How are you going to celebrate your awesomeness, John? I had to throw that out there.
One of the strange things, and I have to give a shout out to Daniel Neumann too, our audio engineer, who is another sort of hidden member of the ensemble, who there is an electronic part to this ensemble, and Daniel and I talked about that, and he did such beautiful work, very subtle work. But he and I were texting about this the other day, that after a concert, it's traditional for musicians to kind of go out to a restaurant or a bar and just kind of have a few drinks and talk and sort of celebrate. So I think I will probably celebrate this evening by having a small glass of scotch, and in the quiet of this in this strange pandemic. So it feels a little funny that we can't all hang out now.
Yeah, I'm
feeling a lot
of
our celebrations recently. Look, that's good. I have a question, John. Another one for you. Asking about whether Western art music notation was really not quite up to the task of representing what you wanted to do in this piece.
boy, could I tell you stories about that? That was perhaps in addition to just getting my bearings in writing for this piece, figuring out how to notate to get what I wanted took a lot of time and a lot of very sleepless nights. Because no, Western notation doesn't really provide. So I had to figure out, I mean, I sort of used older notation, but I also had to figure out a way to do things. And, there's color coding in the score, and there's sort of lots of ways that I kind of had to think a little bit outside of the box to get the effect that I wanted. So the trick for me was to write this piece, but to make it feel like me. I still needed to feel like I'm not kind of wearing a different hat. I needed to make this a John Fitz Rogers piece. And the notation fought me every step of the way. And then when I figured it out, okay, that's fine. But then doing the individual parts, the sheet music for all the players, every single cue, every one that they listened to had to be notated in the parts to create this kind of lattice work of listening. And that just took an enormous amount of time. So I was begging, could I have a little more time to finish this, because the notation was a tricky challenge.
It's interesting. The piece reminds me of, like, it feels and sounds like music that was created through a kind of oral tradition, which is another way in which it takes me back to Music for 18 Musicians, which was very much created within an oral tradition. Like, that was a piece where there was no score for the first 20 years of the piece's existence. And here too, like, often, John, the ideas that you had were so clear and often, like, rather simple in the best possible way. But then the notation and the text was this thing that we had to, take in, and that, because it couldn't be conveyed in conventional notation, we had to take in and get through the way you, as John said, the way you learn your lines in a show, to then get to the point where the ideas are internalized.
Yeah, and I would also say that it posed a challenge for me in composing too, because so much of it is improvised. I could kind of improvise it here, and I did, but a lot of it I just had to think. There's really no way I could sort of play through. I often just play through my pieces on the piano, and I sort of kind of mock them up, or maybe I could use a computer if things are really rhythmically tricky. That was out the window. So a lot of this was just kind of staring at score paper, imagining what it would sound like, and hoping for the best.
I just want to throw in a really quick moment from rehearsal that I remember, where we were trying to, like, find the right kind of ebb and flow to a section near the end with all the harmonics. And Alan actually asked John to play what you were imagining on the piano, and you did, and it was, kind of like real life, where we could just tap into your brain there, and that was hugely helpful too. So just another little amendment that was able to be made in the moment.
Yeah, totally. That's part of why it feels like a sort of oral tradition piece to me, is that often, like, and John and I would do that in the process of, like, my learning the piece, because often, like, I would read the description, and it was helpful, and it got me the sort of general idea, but, like, hearing John play an example of what, he had in mind, like, instantly made things clearer.
I want to get to a few questions about sort of some nuts and bolts that maybe I can answer sort of on the quicker side. Nancy Adams is asking, what was this actually real time where performers could hear each other? What technology was used? Were they listening to different tracks, click tracks? Yeah, what is special, I think, about the way we were recording these. I think many groups, certainly any large ensemble that would not be together, typically what folks are doing are recording one part at a time and passing that recording on, and another person will lay their part down on top of it, or players will be utilizing a click track to play to, and then all the tracks are combined after the fact. What was special and what we really wanted to do to have this sense of community and playing together was yes, we were recording and these live and playing together live. And the main thing we used, as referenced earlier, Zoom to be able to see each other, and a program called Jamulus with a server that was sort of centrally located among the musicians that helped us balance our audio feed and helps reduce but does not eliminate latency. Asking about what happens if the internet connection cuts out or a
Ah,
screen freezes. Gavin, maybe you should take that one.
It's the same thing that happens in real life. When it happens,
Yep.
it just happens. And in fact, there was it has happened every time that we have done one of these, that one person's internet connection just gets poor. Maybe in their apartment building that day, their neighbor decided to get online and play a multiplayer game, and the internet just gets clogged up, and some of those things just happen in the moment. So there's an aspect of it which is just, no business like show business. The show must go on. But I guess maybe to counterbalance something I said before, which is that, we embrace all the quirks of it. We're still trying to make something beautiful. And so there are problems that have come up. And often we have had to solve those problems in post, because when the internet breaks, and that is the actual place, it's as if a part of the building you were in real life collapsed, right? And you can't fix it right then and there. And you just kind of have to go on. I think some interesting ways that we're working now, which, the question is not, is this better than real life? The question, I think, is, what are the things that we can take from this moment, the things that we're learning, and that we can carry forward, so that what we're doing here is not merely stopgap, but that it also actually maybe changes some of the ways we work, some of the ways that we create. And sometimes it doesn't work. But actually, when you think about it, and sometimes in real life it doesn't work. Alan has a famous story where he was in the middle of an opera and there was wasn't there a tornado or something?
Oh yeah, David, in Dog Days. Yeah, right. We had a,
So, again,
right.
I come back to this notion that everything is just technology, and we work and make a living and make a life and make art in those conditions. So yeah, when it fails, we figure it out. That's the answer.
I think something that's hard about the failure in this situation, and is different from a concert, is that, when everything is working, it's this remarkable feeling of us all being in the same place together. Like, I'm standing in my living room and I'm conducting at a screen. And, if anyone looking at me, it looks like I'm a lunatic in my living room waving my arms around at a monitor, but I feel like I'm in a room with all of you. And then when someone's tech goes wrong, and after Krista, our oboist, had her laptop power fail in the middle of a rehearsal. And it's very emotional. And I think part of why it's very emotional is that in that moment when your personal technology fails, the illusion of all of us being together, connected with each other, kind of goes away. And suddenly it's you at home alone, trying to get your shit to work. And it's really frustrating and painful. And I think that's part of why.
Yeah, and I think maybe the emotional meaning and the emotional valence of what it is that we're doing here is technology makes us aware of how much more fragile things are in exactly the way. And there's something terrifyingly beautiful about that. And that has happened. And, there's still problems that we're going to have to solve. And some of them are just really quite unpredictable.
Yeah. A few questions, if I could return just to a couple of the other pieces. So there's a number of people have been asking about some of the earlier pieces on the program specifically. And one is about Rohan's piece and how in the world that was happening. This is the Rohan Chander piece that we saw sort of a sneak preview of with the 4 performers. And how were those Wii controllers working and how are they involved? Again, maybe, Gavin, you might want to take this, but I can tell you that we were essentially using remote controls, which you could kind of see in the portions of that video where sort of behind the scenes you could see the lights on and you could see the remote controllers. They were in turn activating Wii controllers, which were in turn activating a program on our computers called Oscillator, which were in turn fed into essentially the composer's laptop and created electronic sounds, all meshed together using a program called Max MSP. Yeah. So I think I don't know if that's a great answer to that question.
You've
That's
answered
great.
the question as
Okay.
completely as
It was a long chain of of technologies that I have no understanding of whatsoever, but it really sounded and looked cool.
I think the coolest technology in that piece is actually the most basic one. And it's like, when you look at the video, and the video looks so cool, I think it looks like it was all sort of put together in post-production with like, visual effects, but it's not. Like, each one of you figured out how to make your room vanish into the black. So we were only seeing you lit from your laptop screen. And then Rohan made videos for everybody that are changing color and turning on and off. And so that's the lighting. Like, the lighting effects is entirely from people's like laptop. Like what you were seeing in the video is pretty much like, that's what it looked like. Like, that was what Zoom looked like when you all were performing. And I think that is a genius.
It was amazing. And it was actually a part of the work that took me completely by surprise when we started rehearsing it. I didn't realize when I was just following my video that how that was all going to work when I was trying to prepare my part. And it was really amazing. And it's kind of extraordinary how much time we spent just getting those rooms, getting the rooms just right, and getting the lighting that was sort of the same on all of us in terms of how much we were lit.
But isn't that fun though? I think about this in so many different ways that, so one thing that pandemic has in a sense forced on us is that we have to do this and we have to do that. But then you can flip that around and you say, we get to figure these problems out, or get to, like in Rohan's case, I know that he sort of took these remote controls and kind of gutted them and repurposed them. And if we weren't in this circumstance, we wouldn't have done that. And I think that's cool too.
Right.
Like, part of our job as culture workers is to imagine this stuff and to use our creativity within those constraints. And so, yeah, we have to. This is the only way we're separate and we can only do Zoom, but then we get to make this stuff this way. I think that's cool.
Yeah, and I would just say again, I would have never dreamed of writing this kind of piece like Respiration a year ago, and it was a great gift for me. I wouldn't trade it for the world. This has just been a wonderful experience, and I learned something about myself as a composer I would not have learned had I not been faced with these challenges. So I think what you're saying, Gavin, you can try to make some lemonade here from this situation.
Yeah, and I guess that speaks, of course, to the pandemic as a whole. We're all sort of trying here to make lemonade out of this out of this situation. And look, I think that's probably a good place to bring this conversation to a close. I know there's some questions we may not have gotten to, and please feel free to email me. I'm sure other folks in the group would be willing to talk to you, or the composer as well, but feel free you can find my email at the University of South Carolina. Send questions my way. I'd be more than happy to answer them. One listener, for example, really is dying to see some of the score of your piece, John. There was a page. I should say that this video that we watched tonight, the concert itself, will be still up on YouTube at the University of South Carolina School of Music's YouTube channel for about 2 weeks from now. If you want to see a part of the score, there is a picture of it in the talk that precedes the performance of John's piece, for example. And I did want to mention again that you can go and rehear and re-see any of the 4 pieces that you enjoyed, particularly this evening. So, look.
And I should add to that too, just in
ahead.
case that these pieces also exist on the Alarm to Sound YouTube channel,
Yes.
and we will publish a standalone version of John's piece in about maybe 4 weeks. And so that this piece and the others that you heard tonight, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. And then when Rohan's piece comes out and other pieces in the Video Chat Variations piece series comes out, you'll be able to enjoy those as they are premiered on YouTube.
Great. Well, look, my friends, thank you all for being here in this discussion, and my friends at home who've been watching, thank you for watching and tuning in. It's been a great pleasure to do this and to keep making art, no matter what. And we're going to keep doing that. So thanks again. This is Mike Harley with the Southern Exposure New Music Series at the University of South Carolina. Tonight's concert featured Alarm Will Sound, and we'd love to see you back for our next and final concert of the year. It's April 16, and it'll be at the Cooper Library Fountain, another outdoor concert featuring USC School of Music faculty, works by George Crumb, Chen Yi, and others. We'd love to see you there on April 16, and you can look for more information about that concert coming up. But again, thanks for joining us, and have a great evening.
Bye.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you, guys.